Hello and welcome to the Black Tower podcast. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Andrew.
And we have with us a special guest, Greg.
What's going on, everybody?
Hello, Greg.
What's up, Greg?
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and, 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll get into it.
I don't know if I have 3 or 4 minutes worth to tell. Just a modest insurance adjuster by day and newly minted Wheel of Time fanatic at night. I'm actually still in my first read through. I'm saying all this stuff because this is relevant to the podcast. So, just recently fell in love with the series. A buddy of mine got me onto it and had a lot of awesome interactions on the exploding Wheel of Time community on Twitter. And just super happy to be a part of a really awesome community. I mean, I'm part of a bunch of different fandoms and have been for a long time. And I have to say, Wheel of Time community is really impressing me with how they are with everyone. So, thanks for having me on, and I'm looking forward to discussing stuff with you guys.
Yeah, awesome. Our pleasure. I wanted to ask you where you are in your first read through, because I think you're right at the same place I am.
Yeah, so I'm in Towers of Midnight.
Yeah.
And I don't know where we are on spoilers for this episode. I think we're trying to say spoiler-free-ish for that part of the series, so I won't reveal exactly where I'm at, but I will probably be done in the next 2 to 3 days and on to A Memory of Light.
Yeah. I think based on your comments on the Discord, I think we're both in about the same spot.
I think that's fair to say, because I think I said something earlier today, and you're like, "Oh, I read that crap last night," and I was like, "Oh no."
Yeah,
he's right there.
Because I work third shift, and I do a lot of my reading at work at night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm in my first reread, and as soon as I can get caught back up with school, I'll be starting my reread of Crown of Swords. Yeah, I think that's what I'm.
You're not sure when you read them all pushed together like that, it all kind of blends in.
Well, even on the first read through, it was kind of like that for me. I mean, it's which everyone kind of complains about some of the books between Crown of Swords and Crossroads of Twilight. I liked all of those, but I could definitely tell there was like a slump in that area, especially with around Crossroads. So, but I see like everybody hating on Crossroads. I'm like, I don't hate it. It was just kind of slow.
Yeah, it is Crown of Swords I'm on, by the way.
Awesome.
But sweet. So
we're gonna do our spoiler warning and then jump into it here.
That's exactly what I was about to start reading.
Well, great minds think alike.
Nice.
If you want to go ahead and do that for us.
Yep. So this episode is going to cover the first of the mini books from the Wheel of Time series. If you have not read The Eye of the World, you're in danger of minor spoilers. Again, that is, I always call it the exposition for the series, and I think most people would probably agree.
A good way to put it.
That's a fair. Yeah. So it's, I personally, I find it kind of weird if you're here and you haven't at least read Eye of the World or listened to it, but it is what it is. So be warned.
Yeah. Well, there's the possibility that there's people out there who are wanting to know, is this book series for me? Is this something I want to get into? And they're looking for other people's reactions before they jump into it themselves or commit to what's essentially a 15-book series.
There you go. The Black Tower reacts to Eye of the World.
Right. So I have limited time tonight, so I'm going to go first. And then Andrew and Greg are going to finish up for me, and I will listen to what they said later. But just a quick recap. Last week we talked about the technical things that are in the Eye of the World. We walked through kind of the format and who's in it, and an overview of what the book actually contained. And I think it's important to talk about some certain things in here because he's setting up a lot of stuff for later in the book. He's foreshadowing tons of stuff, but that's not what I'm talking about. I mean, he's setting up a magic system. He's setting up systems of government. He's setting up nations and their borders. He's building all this, all the world. He's doing the world building. Andrew calls it exposition. I mean, and it is all that, but it's important for the whole series. So every time I talk to somebody and they're like, oh yeah, I started on like book 4 and you just kept reading from there. I'm like, you missed all the good stuff. You missed all the setup. I don't know what's wrong with you.
Like, how do you understand the series that you started before after the beginning?
It doesn't
like,
make sense to me either.
How do you do math when you can't learn to count? You know, it's like Common Core math, I guess. So, one of the biggest things that I guess is talked about, and it comes from this book, I think, is that the whole world is, people feel like in Robert Jordan's series, the whole world is flipped upside down, and it's women are in charge and men are subservient to the women. And I'm not sure that I see that at all. I mean, is that a fair statement to say, like that people are saying that about this series and that it's not really actually 100% true?
I think it's fair, especially with the announcement that at least I think the first season is supposed to be predominantly from Moraine's point of view,
right? When
that it's this very heavy focus on just, I guess for us it seems like a reverse of modern parallels or real world parallels. Because the majority of human history, there really weren't, women in power on a wide scale. You had the Queen of England as a good example, and I'm sure there are other civilizations that had it as well in the, I guess what you would call like the ancient or older world. But here, you see far more influential or leader rolled women. So it's kind of like an opposite from our history, but not purely, I don't think.
One, I think, too, one thing we have to look at is when people say, it's completely reversed. It's not exactly true. You still have kings, you still have lords, you still have men in power, but there is a more predominance of women in powers that traditionally were held by men, at least in our history. And I think when people first run into that, they're like, oh, everything's topsy-turvy. It's like, not necessarily. It's more spread out. It's more even, I would think. Because, I'm just going through my head right now of all the different nations, and some have kings, some have queens, some have both to a degree in the case of like Terabon with a king and a panarch. And so it's really different than what we're used to reading, especially in high fantasy. Because in high fantasy, it's like the king's a king, he's a dude, it's always going to be a dude, and that's that. And if there's a queen, there's some weird circumstance by which there's a queen. Whereas, like in the case of like Andor, there's never been a king. It's always been a queen, and there's always be a queen, and there's no discussion if there's going to be a king. It's just a queen. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily turned upside down. I just think there's a more even spread among the types of leadership we see in regards to men and women in leadership.
Right. Well, I think he tried to like create a world without influences based on gender, and said, what would the world have evolved to if men weren't in charge and women weren't subservient? But not that it was flipped, just, what would the natural progression be if everybody was equal?
Yeah, it's like the Marvel What If series,
right? And I think that's a more important message to take away from this series than women are great, women should be in power. It's not a role reversal; it's a message of equality.
Yeah, I mean, that's where you can get the argument of not to get too far into it, but I think it's fair to say that rather than calling this a very popular like feminist style text, that it's more along the lines of like a gender equality text. Not to get into, and I know there's people that are going to argue that feminism is the same, and that's something that I'm not going to get into because that's real world politics.
Right. We try to stay away from that.
You can feel free to hit me up personally for it because I do have a bachelor's degree in political science. So just saying.
Yeah. Cool brag, bro.
Not to be offensive to anyone, like that's just a statement, not to like ruffle feathers or anything.
Well, I mean, I think it's a fair statement. I mean, it's if you step back and look at the scope of the world that Robert Jordan created, and you look at the ratio of women leaders versus men leaders, and then once you get more into the history and find out, okay, has it always been a woman? Has it always been a man? So on and so forth. I think you guys are right. I think you guys are hitting the nail on the head with this whole thing of what does gender equality look like, especially in leadership, and I think we see a pretty good picture of that in this series, and I like the way he sets it up in Eye on the World particularly.
Yeah. And I picked up the series and was hooked from the beginning, and there's almost no female points of view in the whole book. It's like it's a very small percentage of the book is female points of view, and it was all male point of view. And even with all the male points of view, it still felt balanced, and the world that they were looking at was fair for the most part. You still have individuals who are screwing over other individuals, just like any other situation.
Yeah, and I think Robert Jordan did a really great thing in the way the writing style has accomplished that, because when you're reading, like let's take for example, when Perrin and Egwene have been separated from the group after Shudder Logoth, and they're running from the White Cloaks, and they meet up with the Tinkers, and yeah, you know what I'm saying,
right?
Like, it doesn't feel like you're obviously seeing things from Perrin's point of view, but when they talk to each other, when Perrin and Egwene talk, you don't feel like you're just sitting there watching two people talk. Like, you actually feel it like you're a part of the conversation, and it's done in a way to where whatever Egwene says in the conversation isn't like underplayed by what Perrin says or Perrin thinks. There's still that bit of mystery because we don't really get to see what Egwene thinks, but it feels to me like it's still a very even conversation. Like, this is a organic, real conversation they're having, not something that's just written for, well, this is from the man's point of view. Let's sit here and listen to what he has to say, and we'll kind of listen to the woman, and it is what it is.
Well, and you have to look at this too. I mean, he took into consideration when they first got pressed together who was going to take charge, and he initially didn't want to. And he was like, okay, so is Egwene going to do this? Like, what are we doing, Egwene? And then before long, he realized, oh, she's wanting me to do it. And it's not this thing of I'm the man, I'm gonna put you under my foot and I'm gonna take control. It's who do I need to step up? Is this where I step up? Because it's such a natural thing for women to move into leadership positions, especially with Perrin growing up under a wisdom in Emond's Field, Nynaeve and those before her. It's just a very natural thing to see both sexes in charge, and I think that's and I agree with the point of view assessment there as well as the you don't feel that. You don't feel like, let's shut Egwene out, let's shut all the other women out and just listen to what the dudes have to say. It's almost open-ended. You really get a feel for what's going on with the other characters, especially the female characters, even if you're not in their head yet, which we all know that changes pretty drastically from the second book on.
Right. And that struggle with Perrin, that internal struggle of, I don't want to be in charge, but these other people want me to be in charge, is kind of the underlaying current of his story for the rest of the series. Well, at least all the way up until where we are.
Well, even where I am in Towers of Midnight, he's still like, okay, I never wanted to do this. Like, I don't want to do these things and be this person and all this other stuff. But he goes from being super reluctant to being, I'm going to do what has to be done. So, but you see that start all the way back in Eye of the World.
Right. And that's what I mean by Robert Jordan is setting up all of these characters. He's setting up not just the world building of these grasses are green and these trees are big. He's setting up the characters and who they're going to be for the rest of the series. Like, Rand's going to be this way, or Matt's going to be that way, and there's going to be a badger, and then there's going to be another badger. And, it's not the typical foreshadowing like we get with mentions of the viewings and the prophecies and things like that are foreshadowing something to come. But that's what this book is about for me, and I love it. I love all the setup that's in here, even as it pertains outside of the typical foreshadowing that you get in a series.
Yeah, I'd have to say I definitely agree with you. I mean, and I call it the exposition, because in literary terms, exposition is just where everything is introduced, and we really are introduced to the whole concept, and it's interesting because we not only get to be introduced to just the way Edmonds Field is, and kind of generically the Two Rivers area, because there's references where the other local village wisdoms, and it seems like the local areas run a lot in the same way, but we get to watch and kind of go along with the Edmonds Fielders, I suppose, as they get to see what some of the rest of the world is like. As they travel, all the way up and through Camelin and everything. And to me, it's just a very exciting journey because you're discovering the world at the same time that these, country bumpkins are. And it's not like what you would expect, I don't. Because I mean, the first real major city they come to, not including Whitebridge, I'm talking like major city, like obviously on the scale of Camelin, is ruled by not only a queen, but a queen that is over their hometown or home village, and they didn't even know about it.
Yeah, that's something that kind of really hit home for me too. Is they're talking about all these different things in the town, but when they're still in Emmons Field, it's like the only leadership that matters is the town council and the women's circle, the mayor and the wisdom. That's it. There's no other consideration. But then when they get further along and they all realize, oh, are we in Andor? Are we technically under this queen? They realize that the world is so much bigger than what they've grown up in. And I have to say that's one of my favorite parts of our favorite things to take away from the book as well, is just how they go from a small, limited scope to being exposed to all these different things in the rest of their world. And it was just it was a really good sense of adventure in that book, I think.
Right. And I think I've said before, that's what hooked me on this book. Is I opened it up after I got through the prologue. I hit the first chapter, and it's like you get introduced to one character on a road walking along, and then, oh, well, he's really there with his dad, so now we have two. And it starts this really narrow focus. It's almost like you've got blinders on, and the whole world, it's like when you're playing a video game and the whole map is shrouded in fog and you don't know what's out there and you don't know where the enemy forts are or whatever. You start exploring, and it's like in the book you start exploring and expanding it out. And I understand that's a fantasy thing, is to kind of build one part of the world and then keep expanding on it. But I think whereas other series I've read have been like, oh, we've created a whole nation, boom, it's there. And then the next book, okay, now there's two. And then they keep just kind of giving you big chunks at a time. I feel like this series, and especially this book, kind of introduces you to all these characters at what feels like a very organic, natural pace. Like you're observing the world. And this guy who's never left home is now traveling the world, and you get to see it all through his eyes. And that's what hooked me, was that first chapter.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the same here, because like I've mentioned it before. You're going along with Rand and Perrin and Egwene and Nynaeve, and Matt, and just as they're being thrust into a world that's so much bigger than they realized, you're being exposed to this world that you're like, holy crap, and it's not just like subtle differences from area to area, like they're drastic major differences from every area, and that goes through the entire series, not just in the Eye of the World. I mean, I think we can agree that Baralon is very different from Whitebridge, is very different from Camelin, not just in terms of town, village, city size, but in terms of the culture, the way that people act, the mannerisms. And I actually got a really good sense of awe from the description of Camelin through, the eyes of Rand and Matt as they first arrived.
Guys, this is where Aaron is leaving. This is the part of the podcast where Aaron is leaving. I did the thing, guys. You can keep it in there.
Okay, we'll keep it in there.
There you go.
All right.
All right, have a good one at work.
All right, bye.
Later, man.
All right, so yeah, this whole world building that goes on is, as the series goes on, in my opinion, it just becomes even more and more almost mind blowing in a way. To see so many different cultures, and I mean, you can see the world inspirations to them. And obviously, I don't want to get too terribly far into them because we don't really see a whole lot of it in this book, but you get the idea.
Well, and I think he does a great job in Eye of the World at introducing the scope of the world without throwing too much at you. Because if you really step back and look at it, the majority of Eye of the World takes place within one country's borders. The majority of it, and of course, things that happen at the end aside, that's mostly where they're at. But the size of that nation, and like you guys were saying a second ago, the differences between like Baralon and Whitebridge, Camelin, even the two rivers, there's just such drastic differences. But in those differences alone, you get this sense of, Rand and the others, have such a small world, view of the world, or if you will. But then as they go along, they see there's so much more to it, places they've only ever heard of in stories. Like when they talk about reading the travels of Jane Farstrider, they're probably thinking in the back of their head. I think they actually did. One of them did say this. I think Matt may have said something to this effect. They're going on these big adventures and seeing all these big things. But there's just such a difference even in that. But as a reader, when you're reading it, you don't necessarily feel like it's just an info dump, that you're just being inundated with all these different cultures and different races and things like that. I like the way he builds it throughout the series. And even to an extent in the later books, he's still kind of building it. But the way he establishes everything in the beginning, it's enough to get you hooked. It's enough to, for you to open the front of the book and look at the map and go, oh, well, they went here, and here, but I want to see what's over here and point at Tyr, or what's over here and point at Falma, or what's over here and point at Abu Dar, or something like that, and just point at all the different places. And then throughout the rest of the series, he's expanding on that, and they're going to all these different places. But the sense of scope and from the characters' wonder that they have is really something that is really something for me is one of the better takeaways from Eye of the World for sure.
Yeah, and that map is such an incredible, I don't know, motivator or tool or whatever you want to call it.
I look at it so much
because
I look at it all the time.
yeah, but I mean, like, take it, like, remember whenever you first picked up this book and you had no idea what the series was really about, and you're opening the cover and you're going through the first, a couple pages, you see an acknowledgement, and then you see this map, and you're like, oh, okay, it's a map, it's a fantasy world, they need to tell us and show us where things are, and you're like, okay, cool. And then fast forward to whenever you finish the book and you're like, oh wow, that was a really good story, I really like it, and you happen to flip back to the map and you're like, wait, like, I only saw here, and here, and they mentioned here, and they skipped from here to this other place way up here. You're just kind of like, well, what about the rest of the world? And to me, that's part of the draw that pulls you into the next books. Like, well, if it's on the map, logically, there's going to be some interaction with it. So I need to keep reading to see what the other areas are like.
And to be fair, I don't want to say I cheated a little bit, but I started reading Eye of the World at the end of August, and I'm looking at the map, and I started noticing those things. I was like, well, I'm 3/4 of the way through this book, and they've only made it to Camelin. They've only made it over here. Like, there's so much map, and of course I knew, there's way more books ahead. But even still, I was looking at the map. Well, I'm at work one day. I decided just to Google the map. I don't know if you've seen this, but I stumbled on a website where somebody had went through each book and had actually mapped out the trajectories of all the different characters and where they went in each book. Like where they started, where they went, so on and so forth. There wasn't any spoilers attached to it, so by my looking at it, I didn't really get tipped off to what was happening. But I was able to see the scope and see, okay, well, I want to know when they're going to Abu Dar. I want to know when they're going to Tyr. And, it looks like they're going to Tyr in The Dragon Reborn. There it is right there. Spoiler alert, guys. Sorry. But that's kind of the thing is in fantasy books, I feel like if you don't have a good map, you're I feel like all fantasy books have a good map. Let's just be honest. I mean, Tolkien set that bar with his world building and his maps, and then Jordan's done an incredible job. I could go down the list of fantasy authors that have, that their maps are very useful, but I always find myself looking at them, especially, with Robert Jordan's series, with Wheel of Time, especially with this, even in the later books, I still find myself, reading, and I'm reading where one person is and where another person is. And I always find myself flipping over to the map saying, okay, wait, so how far apart are they? What's the likelihood they might run into each other? So it's just the way he set it up in Eye of the World, though, and the way he launched all of it off of that. And the way that map itself, to me, is almost a continual draw to keep you interested, because you can always look at the map and say, where have they not gone and where might they go next?
Yeah, and I think we tend to take maps, fantasy maps at least, for granted. Because looking around the room I'm in my house, I have the large version of the D&D 5e Sword Coast map. I have a zoomed in that's just on the actual section of the map that is the Sword Coast. Obviously, I've got a Wheel of Time map. Then I've got a very nice winterized version of the Mordor map. Thank you, Cave Geek Art. I say thank you. I mean, I bought it, but still. And for those of us that play D&D or have seen people play D&D, and you go kind of a little bit maybe more realistic with it than travel times and stuff, like that map becomes invaluable.
Oh, for sure.
And even for your casual player, well, you're here and you need to go here. That's a long distance, so it's going to take you 2 months or something. But they're really good, and it's not just for letting us see the scope of the fantasy world that we're dealing with, but for helping us keep track of where we are. Because knowing where you are on a map for a lot of people it just kind of helps make the story at least a little bit better, I think.
Well, I have to agree with you. And quick little sidebar about D&D and maps. I'm running a campaign right now for some friends of mine, and I've created the whole world. So the maps are all mine, everything's mine. So I don't just hand them a map. I have to explain stuff to them and all of that. Well, I had the party go somewhere a couple of weeks ago, and what we do is whenever in our circle, all the DMs in our circle, whoever's running the game, we do basically what we call a luck check, which is basically, okay, you're going to travel for 3 days. Okay, so roll a straight D20 on these different days and see if anything happens. So I told these guys, okay, so you're in this part of the map and you're going way over here to this part of the map. Oh, how long is that going to take? I said 22 days. And they're like, what? Yeah, 22 days. So you're going to make us roll 22 times. I said, at first I did, first 5 or 6 times, but then I made them roll. I started grouping the days together, so they were rolling for 3 or 4 days. But But I think you hit the nail on the head as far as talking about maps, because that right there is just an illustration of how important maps are to RPG players, but just in the fantasy genre itself, which RPG is a huge part of, maps are invaluable, and you can never have enough maps. Basically, I guess is what I'm getting at there. I actually needed some from my wall, so thanks for reminding me.
Oh yeah, no problem. So if you have the spare grand or two, Cave Geek has some really nice originals on buckskin.
Ooh.
Just so you know, they're really nice.
I don't know if I have an
buy
extra
one.
grand or two, but that can be something I will keep in mind. I don't have it laying around currently, so
he sells prints of them too, so you don't have to buy the
Right.
original. Like the zoomed in version of the Sword Coast map I have, and that one is one of his regular prints, and then he's doing. I think there's 8 left that he's willing to do, but a limited edition winterized version of Middle Earth. I think I called it Mordor earlier.
Yeah, you said winterized Mordor, and I was like, what is that?
Yeah, I meant like Middle Earth. So yeah, moving on from the discussion of maps, what were some of your favorite scenes and events from the Eye of the World?
Well, it's kind of hard to really pick just one necessarily. I mean, when I started reading these books, a buddy of mine, my friend Brody, who got me into the books, he told me, he said, man, look, he said, the first book, it's a little slow. A lot of people give up on it. Just, crank through it if you find that that's true, and get to the second book and everything picks up. And I said, okay. So I did find that action wise, there wasn't a whole lot in Eye of the World, but plot wise, it was really, really rich. And I feel like people who just want to read books for action, they're not going to like Eye of the World until pretty much the end. I mean, there's a couple of good parts in between. I did like the charge at I'm trying to remember exactly where it was. Was that outside Shadow Logoth when they had to charge the Trollocs, and the boys all started yelling in the old tongue?
Yeah, like it's right before because Moraine and Lan were discussing of where they could go,
right?
And they argued about Lan or Moraine. Was it Moraine that was saying no, and Lan was like, "There's no other choice."
I think so, and it reminded me a lot of the conversation from Fellowship of the Ring, where they were debating on whether or not to go to Moria. Where they said, well, we should go through Moria, and they're like, well, no, let's go around the mountain, and then they're like, well, the mountain won't work. So I think it was in reference to Shadow Logoth for Eye of the World. They were trying to figure out where to move into, because they knew that the Trollocs would not really wouldn't be so quick to follow them into Shadow Logoth because of what was in there. But I really liked when they had to. That was probably one of the first major scenes that stuck out to me. It was a scene of action, but there was more to it than just that. I think when Lan told them, let's turn our horses, we're just going to have to charge these guys. It's basically what he told them. And then when they were rushing down to meet the Trollocs, all the boys start yelling stuff in the old tongue. And basically, as the reader, you read that and you go, what the heck? Like, these dudes probably could barely talk the language they're speaking now, and all of a sudden they're shouting in basically the Wheel of Time equivalent of Latin. And to me, that's what really clued me into. There's a whole lot more going on behind the scenes and going on, with everything in this world than what we've encountered so far. So that one did stick out to me early on in the book for sure.
Oh yeah, it really was such a great scene, because we've seen them getting like lessons when they stop at night from Lan. Matt obviously already being good with the bow. Lan trying to teach Perrin some of the axe, and obviously teaching Rand bladesmanship or swordsmanship. And without that, they surely would have died. No questions asked. But the will weaves as it wills, my dude. So
Exactly. And
I think if I remember the scene correctly, I think they just kind of followed Land's lead, because didn't he shout like to Shar Malkiri?
yeah, I think he did.
And they just were, like, hearing Moraine's story about Manetheren, they were just like, yeah, fuck it, the Shar Manetheren. We don't know what it means, but it sounds like a
that might have
battle
been something I kind of missed, but it still stuck out to me because, again, you have, that's like, I'm from South Alabama, so it's just like if I took, 3-4, little redneck boys that I know, and, I shout something in Latin and start running at something, and then they start shouting in Latin and running behind me. People might expect it out of me, but they're not going to expect it out of these boys I've recruited over here. So it still kind of stuck out in the book because it's starting to show, how much the boys themselves are starting to accept everything else going on outside of Edmonds Field, because it's like we kind of talked about earlier, but we were talking more about excuse me, like geography and world building. But now, as far as the characters go, the scope, their own minds are kind of starting to expand because Lan and Moraine are telling all these different things and saying, oh, you've got this city over here, and we're going to go here, and we're going to take you guys to Tarvalin, and all these different things. And so you're probably right, where they kind of came behind and said, you know what, screw it, let's just yell what Lan yells, and we're not from Malkiri, but we are from what they say used to be called Manetheren, so that sounds good, let's yell that. But even in doing so, I feel like that signifies that they're kind of starting to grow into that, into the roles that they were eventually take up themselves.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, the old blood still stinks, as Moraine said. So something that I thought was an interesting parallel, or not parallel, but an interesting concept was we're all familiar with a lot of foreshadowing, not only in this series but in so many fantasy and sci-fi type series. And the foreshadowing that Rand unknowingly gives when they're about to leave, they're talking about leaving and going on an adventure, and he's like, who knows, maybe we'll meet an Ogier. Maybe we'll see the Green Man. And there was one other remark he made. I can't remember what the third one was.
Yeah, I can't remember either.
But it's, as you finish the series, you're like, wow, that was foreshadowing, because they do. But on the opposite side, this whole time since they've left, it's been, we've got to get you to Tarvalin. We'll figure out what the Dark One wants when we get you to Tarvalin. Tarvalin this, Tarvalin that. And by the end of the series, there's no Tarvalin. Meaning you don't get to see Tarvalin, not the end of the series, but by the end of the book.
I was about to say, I was like, well, hold on. Where did we cross cross streams there? No, you're right. And that was something I kept looking forward to. Or kept looking for was, we're going to get you to Tarvalin. And then, like I said, I found that map, the series of maps where they drew the characters' routes in every book, and I was actually not far from the end of Eye of the World when I found it. And then I saw the route going from, it was Caemlyn to Shinar, I believe, and when they make the jump in the waves. And I sat back and I looked at it and I went, you mean to tell me I'm not going to see Tarvalin in this book? And I just I didn't necessarily roll my eyes, but I was a little disappointed. So it was a little bit of a spoiler, I guess, but I still enjoyed where the book went. I feel like it was a good direction, especially with the realization they have in Caemlyn that makes them go to Shinar. So I think, but you're right about all the foreshadowing. I actually thought about that toward the end of the book. It was like, we might meet this person, or we might meet an Ogier, and oh, hi, Loyal, how are you? And just basically all the things that these boys, all these tales that these boys interacted with, and things they said for jokes and all of that, or just being fanciful, they end up becoming those people, encountering those creatures and those things. And I think that's, to me, that's, and I know this has been said probably 100,000 times, but the Eye of the World to me is the most Lord of the Rings that this series ever gets. because it's kind of like the hobbits leaving Hobbiton in Fellowship, and then you have the boys leaving Emmons Field in Eye of the World. There's a lot of deviations and a lot of differences, obviously, but there's still that sense of wonder. And then, of course, they, like Sam wanting to meet an elf. He knows the elves are real. He's never seen an elf. He's only ever heard stories. Sam wants to meet an elf, and he gets to meet elves and so much more. But Rand and Perrin and Matt, they hear all these stories, and by the end of the book, they have lived a story themselves, met people, been to places, seen things they've only ever heard of from other stories. And so, but in so doing, it foreshadows a lot for the reader. And I'm really interested, once I get through reading this series and come back to it a little bit later, how much of that will stand out to me, because I'm sure that's standing out kind of fresh to you since you're on a reread.
Oh yeah, there's so much of the stuff that happens in the Eye of the World that after finishing the series, going back through and rereading the books, especially Eye of the World, a lot of the foreshadowing and stuff that you see happen, you're just like, if nothing else, it calls to mind stuff that happens later in the series, and you're like, oh man, I can't wait to see where that actually leads to. So there really is a lot to say for the just hang in there, push through it. If it's something that you're getting bored with reading, maybe try the audiobooks. If you have to take a little bit of a break here and there, do it, but don't give up on the series at all, because you will not be disappointed. And if you're going to wait for the TV series to come out so that you can watch everything instead of reading it, I don't know how much from the books the series is going to be able to keep, because as we know from things like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and name a movie, trilogy, TV series based off of the books, there's a lot that gets left out. Like the one that always amazes me is from Harry Potter, when he's at Ollivander in Sorcerer's Stone. In the book, he goes through hundreds of wands.
Yeah.
In the movie, he goes through 3.
Yeah.
You're like, what the fuck?
Well, and that's true. And, a lot of my friends, I feel, like particularly my wife, I've been telling my wife snippets of things happening in the books, and she's like, well, I might read the books. And I'm like, I don't know if you're going to read the books. She's like, well, isn't the series coming out? I'm like, well, I really want you to read the books, but you're right about that. As far as, even recently, I think Rafe Judkins was on Twitter and was kind of hinting at, okay, if we had to cut something or someone, what would you guys be okay with us cutting? And of course, our first answer is nothing. But then, we do understand some things may not make it. But I actually had a conversation with a buddy of mine, the same guy that got me into the series, and we were discussing realistically how many seasons the whole story would cover. And at first, you want to say, okay, a season per book. But then we realized how much of the books, and you see it in Eye of the World, so this is nothing crazy for later in the series, but you see how much of the book is inner dialogue and description, which is all stuff you will not see in the show, which will make for a little bit less content that they're able to adapt. But to me, it is gonna be different. I'm not gonna say it's gonna be worse than the books, but it will be different, because in the book you're in all these points of view, and you're so used to hearing the inner monologues of these characters, and a lot of important stuff happens in those inner monologues. But you're right in saying that. I feel like anybody who's even remotely a fantasy fan, if you've read one fantasy book, you do need to try reading Wheel of Time. And, Eye of the World is a fantastic book. And you have to go into it telling yourself, okay, there's not going to be a battle every other page. There's not going to be bloodshed every other page. This isn't A Song of Ice and Fire. It's not Game of Thrones. It's not even Lord of the Rings. But I'll tell you this, when my buddy got me into the books, this is what he told me. And at first I didn't believe him. Now I do. I definitely do. He said, read the first book. If you find yourself wanting to quit, crank through it and get to the second book. And he says, I'm telling you, dude, by the end of the series, you'll be saying it's more epic than any other fantasy series you've read. And my first comeback to that was even bigger than Lord of the Rings. And he said, yes, it's bigger than Lord of the Rings. And I was like, no way. How is it bigger than Lord of the Rings? And then by the fourth book, I'm texting him and I'm going, dude, this series is so much bigger than Lord of the Rings. I mean, he's like, I told you it was more epic. I told you it was more violent. I told you that it got so much better, and I'm glad you stuck with it. And he's just happy he's got somebody to talk to about the books now.
Yeah, it's so good. Like the long stretches of no action, of character backstory or character development, of explaining this, explaining that. Really, like they're so, the action scenes make it so worth it if that's what you're focused on. Myself, there's things that happen in those kind of lull where there's not action things that are just as much, if not even more exciting than some of the action scenes. And I think just as you develop your love for the series, you start to kind of love things that happen in those bits. There's there's all kinds of moments. There's really hilarious moments. There's really awkward moments, scary moments. There's those really like sweet moments that you'll think back on, as you're looking over the series, and you're just like, man, that was such a great tender moment, or whatever the case is. I mean, it's got something for everyone, throughout the series.
It definitely does, and I think too. Talking specifically about Eye of the World and talking about action in relation to everything else going on in the book. And I feel like this just gets better, or it becomes more important, what I'm about to say, throughout the whole series, and that is you read all these pages and pages and pages of these characters interacting, backstory, all this non-action plot, and then when the action happens, the action is so much more important. Like there's so much more importance attached to the battle or to the fight or to whatever action is happening. There's so much more importance attached to that because of everything else you just read. So, we go back to, when, Lan led the boys against the Trollocs. If Moraine hadn't told them everything about Manetheren before that, and they hadn't had that whole scene, and you hadn't seen where they were coming from before all of that, and seen what the Trollocs did to Emond's Field before all of that, that one scene wouldn't have been that big of a deal. It would have been like, oh, that's nice. You grabbed some horses, you killed some wannabe, orcs, and you ran off. That's great. But when that happened, that's why the things that they yelled stuck out to me, is because something important was happening in the midst of that action. It's the same thing with the end of the book. When they get to the Eye of the World, everything that's happening at the end, because of everything that happened in the book, it's so important, and the action that follows and the conflict that happens up there is so important and extremely revealing, and it just sets up the rest of the series. So, I feel like if as a reader you're coming to it and you're saying there's not enough action, you don't need to stay with that mentality when you read Wheel of Time. You've got to really look at what's going on with each character. And to me, I'm a character guy. If you're developing the character and the character's growing, you've got me. The character doesn't have to pick up a sword a single time for me to like them. And that's just kind of how I am with characters in general. I don't have to have gunfights or sword fights or anything like that. I just have to have a compelling narrative, and the Eye of the World is certainly a compelling narrative for sure.
Yeah, it definitely is for sure. Let's see. So the ending of the book. How did you feel about the way the Eye of the World ends?
Well, I touched on it just a second ago, oddly enough. I like the way it ended because it did what it was meant to do, which was set up the remainder of the series. It ended with just enough questions to ask. It wasn't necessarily like, okay, where do they go from here? It was more of a, well, how did Rand do that? Is Rand going to go crazy because he's kind of revealed to be a male channeler? Is he this dragon reborn we keep hearing discussed, and people, talk about in varying degrees of either awe and reverence or fear and disgust. What's going on with that? It really just it set everything up. And I like the, looking back on it more now, like I thought it was a good ending when I first read it. Looking back on it now, I'm all the way at Towers of Midnight, so looking back all the way back, I think it was a perfect ending, or as near perfect as you could get as far as the plot goes, simply because of everything that happened. I do think he almost. I'm trying to figure out how to put this. I feel like he almost made the ending a little too busy with the introduction of 3 different Forsaken, 2 of which were kind of handily disposed of, and of course we know what happens with the other one. But I don't know. At first I thought that, and then I looked back over it and I said, well, there's 13 of these dudes. I mean, a couple of them are going to get off pretty quick. So I feel like it was a good ending. I felt like it was solid, and I feel like it was a very good way to end the book and set up the Great Hunt and the other books beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked it as well. Not just for the action scene where, we've already been introduced to kind of the elements of female channeling off of Sadir and everything. And so it's not until the end that we knowingly get introduced to the elements of male channeling with Saidin. Obviously by the end we figured out that it was Rand that was channeling the fatigue out of Bella, the shaggy brown mare, and his own horse, which is sweet in its own way because he didn't do it. Obviously, he didn't do it knowingly, but he didn't. It was just his focus on Egwene,
right?
And that's one of those nice, sweet, tender things that you get to experience and enjoy about the Eye of the World is that kind of boyhood. We grew up in the same town. Everybody knows we're going to be together, kind of thing with Egwene and his concern over it, and all that through the entire book makes that ending scene with Egwene and Rand on the balcony in Faldara so much sweeter. But for me, the right after that is, to me, just about the most important part of the entire book, where Moraine is sitting there. There's if you didn't read earlier, the visual and word style cues of Moraine's, I don't know what I'm trying to say, like mischievous trick, there we go, of eavesdropping that she does to listen to what Rand and Egwene are talking about. And she's sitting there alone in the garden with this smirk, and the last thing she says is, the dragon has been reborn, or the dragon is reborn. And especially looking back from having read the series, it's so much more of like that kind of almost spine tingly, like, yes moment. And I think it can very much be the same way with your first read through, because it just sets up a lot, and it lets you know that there's more to come from the series, that there's great things that come from the series. The thing you've been hearing about for almost the entire series now is very much an element of the series. And you're gonna love
it. And I have to agree with that, and I have to say too that with Moraine in particular, she pretty much tells everyone throughout the book, certain times in the book, that's her cause as part of the Blue Aja. That's her cause. She's looking for the Dragon Reborn. She's trying to find the Dragon Reborn and get him ready for the last battle and all of that. And that's her sole focus. So there's kind of 2 things that happened for me there. One is, exactly what you said, which is, the dragon has been reborn, and hearing all this stuff about Luz Theron Telamon and on all this stuff about the dragon reborn and the good and the bad and all that stuff all throughout the book. When she says that, you do have this moment of, that's where this is going. Okay, cool. But when she says that, and then you think back what she said her purpose was, it's almost like you get fulfillment out of that, because she's basically saying, I've done it. I found him. Like I have found him. And I know we're specifically talking about Eye of the World, but that hits you even harder when you get through reading New Spring. It hits you between the eyes when you're through reading New Spring, when it comes to her searching for the Dragon Reborn and everything she's gone through and continues to go through with Rand and and with the second part of her cause, which is to see him to the last battle, it's a very profound moment, and a very big thing to include in the ending. So yeah, I just thought about that before I finished my last little blurb about the ending. But that's a good point to bring up, and I think that is one of the better parts of the ending, is Moraine's revelation of who Rand really is.
Yeah, because you really get a good sense of just of how, like, relieved, how almost it feels like she almost wasn't sure until the very end of the book, and you can tell that there's this very obvious relief about Moraine. She's like, all right, after all this time, after all this crap that I've had to deal with, we're finally at step one. But knowing the rest of the series, you're like, for us that are further along in the series or have read the series, you're like, this is only step one.
Yeah.
Like, you just found the guy. That's all that happened really in the Eye of the World. You found the guy. And you found some very important other people to go along with it. People that, you may not even realize that you're not going to realize just from this first book, that are important for significant portions of the series, if not the remainder of the series. And it's that, to me, it just makes, to me, by the time you get to the end of A Memory of Light, you're almost compelled to go back through and read the entire series again, because I guarantee you there's so much that you missed or that you forgot, that you didn't make the connections by the end of the book, that when you go back through and you start reading, you're going to sit there, read a section, and it's going to dawn on you and be like, Robert Jordan, you motherfucker.
But isn't that always the best type of books, though, is the ones that the more you read them, it's almost like the more you find it, the stuff that's hidden kind of under, or stuff that you forgot. And in continuing to speak of Moraine, when she says that at the end, and again, this is heavier, like you said, if you've read the whole series, but definitely if you've read Newspring, which for anyone who's listening and who has never read any of these books, do not read Newspring first. I do not recommend that at all. You need to read it in publication order. That's my endorsement. But when she says that, and then you kind of put some things together in the timeline, because they talk about, when she became, how long she'd been an Aes Sedai, and how long Lan had been bonded to her as warder, and the Aiel War. So it was 20 years before the book starts. And if you kind of place her search there, that is when it began, was 20 years ago. She's been searching for Rand for his entire life, for 20 years, and she's sitting in that room. And when she says the dragon is reborn, it's like this 20-year weight comes. It's like you can almost feel it yourself. This 20-year weight just comes off of her. And even though, it's just step one, like you were just getting started, I think she's relieved to get started. I mean, does that make sense?
I think it does. I mean, because you also get that kind of thing, because there's how many times throughout the entire series does she look at them all and say, look, I don't know why the Dark One wants you, but just so you know, I will kill every last one of you just to make sure he doesn't get
you. That's telling you how serious this chick is when it comes to these three guys. I mean, and that's, and it just reinforces what she's there to do. And then so that makes that ending much more profound in that regard. Is, she did it. She found the Dragon Reborn. Now the real fun begins, so to speak.
Oh yeah, and there's so much joy, and as far as like a reader goes, to come in the series. And I just hope that anybody that's getting into the Wheel of Time, or is hearing about the Wheel of Time, or is maybe hearing the podcast through whatever way, I really hope that they're able to pick up the series and start reading and get through as much as they can before the TV series comes out, because I firmly believe that with the writing team that Rafe Judkins has, with who Rafe Judkins is as a person, that knowing what happens in the series and having read the books or listened to the books through audiobook, because Kate Reading and Michael Kramer do such a
so good,
fantastic job
so good.
in the audiobooks. Yeah, I'm a person like I prefer to read when I can, but if I can't, I did use like a free trial with audiobooks to listen to part of Lord of Chaos at least, and I was blown away because I hadn't listened to him really that much before. I'd heard little sound bits, but it was so good. But yeah, just I really hope that you can absorb as much of the actual material before the series comes out.
So in talking about the difference between reading the actual book and the audiobook, I've been doing both. I work pretty long hours, but there's times throughout the day where I can kind of, I don't want to say it's dead time or downtime, but I can kind of listen to some stuff on my phone or whatever, music, whatever. And so I've been filling that time with audiobooks. I've been listening through the Wheel of Time. And but then when I come home in the evenings and I've got some more free time, I have the physical copy of the book and I go to it and I read it. But I had to talk about, Michael Kramer and Kate Reading. They, I have listened to every single book, and by the time it's done, we'll have listened to every single book, either in part or its entirety, with those two reading it, and they are just phenomenal. I saw some stuff on Twitter a few weeks ago, I think, where there was this thread going around about how Rafe Judkins needs to try to include the two of them in the show some way, if he's got some kind of narration that needs to be read, or if they need to be like these side characters that show up for an episode or two or something, to find some way to integrate them into the show at some point, because they, to a lot of Wheel of Time fans, especially those who have, listened to the audiobooks, they're the voice of Robert Jordan. They're the voice of the books. I know they technically read for all the characters, which, and somebody in our Discord the other day was curious about this because it's such a male-heavy book. Eye of the World is. You only get, I think, 1, maybe 2 chapters of female point of view. So if you listen to the audiobook, the majority of it's Michael Kramer, but you get to a couple chapters where it's Kate Reading, because Kramer reads the male point of views and Reading reads the female point of views. And at first it's a little jarring because you got used to one narrator, but as the series progresses, it just makes more and more sense, and it flows so much better to have them both read it. And there's certain characters that Michael Kramer and Kate Reading are the voice of in my head when I read by myself, when I'm not using the audiobooks. Like, they're the voices of the characters, certain characters, not all the characters, but some of them. I feel like the voice for Rand in my head is Michael Kramer, and I love the way Kate Reading does Nynaeve. I think she really sells Nynaeve and all her aggression. I don't know if that's the right word to describe Nynaeve.
I think it's a good
in
word.
part, and she's not which, I mean, we find a lot of stuff out about her later, but she's not she's not heartless, but definitely an Eye of the World, since that's what we're talking about on this episode. She's very much the domineering my way or the highway type person, and the way Kate Reading brings her personality out, the way she reads her parts later on in the book is fantastic.
Oh yeah, well, she kind of has to be for what we see in the Eye of the World, given where she's, been wisdom and dealing with the village council and everything of the sort. But have you heard? Go ahead. Oh, no, mine's changing.
I was just going to say, just talking about Nynaeve real quick. I see a lot of people where it says it took them a long time to like Nynaeve. I knew I liked Nynaeve when she showed up in, was it Baerlon? When she showed up, when she showed up in Baerlon, was like, I have followed you all the way from Emmons Field, from the Two Rivers, to get you guys back, and I'm not leaving until I get you back. And when she said that, I was like, you're never leaving, girl. You're never leaving. But yeah, I liked her then, and I can tell why, maybe to a degree, she was kind of a hard sell with some people, but I liked her. All the Emmons Fielders, I liked them all from the get-go. And to me, it wasn't even a character you love to hate type thing. It was just, I liked Nynaeve. I liked how bossy there's the word, bossy she was. I liked how she was just kind of out to prove her leadership and all of that. And of course that just gets deeper as the series goes on with her. But I liked her character a lot. But anyway.
Yeah, I didn't like her at first, but I did understand her, and I was impressed by her much in the same way that Lan was, that she tracked them all the way to where they were. Like, Lan was like, what the hell do you mean you followed us? No one can follow us. And it's like, actually, you're not as good as you think you are, sir. But have you heard like the percentage breakdowns for the points of views from the different characters?
I did. I found an article a while back. I may have shared it in Discord with you guys, where it showed the point of view breakdowns. I can't remember it all off the top of my head, but also.
Yeah. I was going to read it back out. Yeah. So Rand al'Thor gets 79.6% of the POVs. Perrin gets 12.6%. Nynaeve gets 3.7%. Of course, this encapsulates the prologue. Luz Theron Telmon gets 0.08%. Moraine gets 0.04%. But Chapter 53 is only that's Chapter 53 that she gets. But it's definitely worth mentioning from the rumors that the first season will be from her point of view. But Egwene's statistic is a little interesting because some of us may know, some of us don't. I honestly didn't until I was doing a little bit of research, because I don't read young adult literature really, as far as specifically targeted. But in 2002, The Eye of the World was re-released as 2 separate books.
Yeah, I think I've seen. Yeah, I think I've seen that. The first one was like From the Two Rivers or something like that.
Yeah, and the second one was To the Blight. And if you include the second book and its prologue, Raven, which focuses on a 9-year-old Egwene, then she has 3.22% of the POV. Which I want to read that, if nothing else. I mean, I want to read that prologue. I need to read that prologue.
Yeah, I do too, because that's I have the single volume, and it's not. I'm actually holding it right now. It's not in here. And I think I would remember that too, but I need to read that for sure.
Yeah, Ravens isn't in the regular release. That was, I guess, keeping with the tone of there being a prologue for each book, and that was the prologue for To the Blight, which I think could be very interesting to read. The From the Two Rivers. And then you get the prologue of, well, here's this sudden image of 9-year-old Egwene going into the rest of the Eye of the World. It'll be interesting to see them maybe try to do the same thing again. Maybe they'll do it if the series takes off. But of course, Brandon Sanderson would have to write, those extra prologues.
Well, and you mentioned, and I guess this is something I'm just hearing about, I guess now or today, is that apparently they're doing the first season from Moraine's point of view. While I'm not against that, I do have questions of how that might work, seeing as how the actual book is mostly from Rand's point of view. So I'm just curious as to, I'm not saying it wouldn't work. I think it would. I think it's definitely an interesting take, and it's something I would be willing to sit down and watch. It's definitely not a deal breaker or anything, but I just have questions about how that might work, since, in the book, Rand is basically the principal character of Eye of the World. And it's like you just said, the point of view breakdown, Moraine's was, what did you say? It was like 0.04 or something like that.
Yeah, like as far as the Eye of the World goes, she gets less time than Luz, as far as POV, less time than Luz Theron from the
and that wasn't very long either.
It really wasn't. It's you can't ignore it and everything, but it's still very short. I can't remember where the rumor started or came from. I think someone said it kind of might have came from Rafe. Don't quote me on that. I know I've seen 1 or 2 articles that mentioned that, and even as we're talking, I'm trying to, find it. I know Variety.com had an article that they released back in early October that said that it was going to be a female-driven fantasy series. Yeah, because we know Rafe is famous, from he did his work on like Agents of Shield and several other very popular TV series. So that part's very exciting.
It is pretty exciting, and I did remember seeing, I think, at least the headline for the saying that Wheel of Time is a female-driven fantasy series, but I guess I didn't make that connection with like a single female point of view. But I guess it's because, kind of looping back all the way to how we started the episode tonight, the spread of male to female, points of views and leadership and all of that. That's kind of the way I took it, because you do see a lot more female characters at the forefront in the center of the story, compared to some other series like Lord of the Rings, where you have maybe 3 or 4 main female characters, and they're really still very much tied to whatever happens to the male characters. Whereas in Wheel of Time, there's some female characters that are extremely important to the story, and no other character really has any kind of bearing, on them as far as, who they are and what they do and all of that stuff. And even the characters that are married, they get married or whatever, that they are actually in some way tied to a man. Talking about female characters, they're actually tied up to a man in some way, whether it be a warder or husband or whatever. It's still there. You don't get the sense that everything that they're doing is because of or in light of this guy. It's very much they're their own person. They drive the story themselves. So when I read that headline, that's kind of where my mind went, was, oh yeah, because there's going to be a lot more really upfront female characters, because that's the way Wheel of Time is. I guess I didn't think it would be like a Moraine point of view, which again, I'm not necessarily against. I just think that's an interesting angle, and I'd like to see how it works.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Like you, I'm not against it. I don't think it's a horrible idea. To be honest, I don't think, as far if you're anime fans know this for sure, but I don't think it's canonically accurate. It's not canon, because I've seen a lot of descriptions that say, the Wheel of Time follows Moraine, and I'm like, no, it doesn't. Like we're not gonna get further into it, but it does not follow Moraine. And they describe the Aes Sedai as a shadowy, all-female organization. I'm like, well, you got the all-female, right? But there's nothing shadowy about the Aes Sedai, other than, as you learn later on, kind of, but they're not, freaking what's his name, from the Dark Knight movies, the guy that taught Batman.
Well, in the comics, League of Assassins or League of Shadows in those movies, but yeah, I know what you're talking about. I wouldn't use that. I wouldn't use that word to describe the Aes Sedai either. Even from the world, I wouldn't use them. Yeah. Mysterious, yeah. There's definitely an air of mystery to the Aes Sedai. There's always, throughout the entire book, Eye of the World, is an air of mystery around Moraine. There's this perception, depending on where you're at on the continent. There's different perceptions of Aes Sedai, which I actually thought was another interesting way of talking about scope. Is if you talk about Aes Sedai and the Two Rivers, they're scared to death of them. But then when you go to Barillon and you meet the Children of the Light, and then you see them later on down the road with Perrin and Egwene, they call Aes Sedai witches. So they're not afraid of them. They just think they're of the shadow, so to speak. And then when you get to Caemlyn, everyone likes Aes Sedai. They respect the Aes Sedai. The queen has an Aes Sedai attendant. So it's really interesting. But I've never thought of the Aes Sedai as shadowy. In fact, that is the opposite, I think, of what they would want to be called.
Yeah, I definitely agree. But I completely lost my train of thought. But yeah, do you have any final comments on the Eye of the World?
Just that, in light of everything we've discussed, there's so much more we can talk about. I mean, any part of this series. That's why there's a whole, your podcast and here the Black Tower, and you got the White Tower. And then there's more and more cropping up. I've debated doing one myself. We'll see. But I think all in all, I don't think people should discount the importance of Eye of the World, and I don't think they should let some of the slower moments in Eye of the World go by idly. And I guess what I mean by that is, hurry up, let's get to the good part, because looking back on it, that entire book is gold. It's a solid first book. It's a solid foundation, and it's a good a debut book for a series as could be written, I think. And I've read so many different series, and I have to say, if as far as world building, character building, plot, everything, it ticks all the boxes for me. And I'm actually kind of excited to get back into it at some point in the near future and reread it and see what kind of interesting things I can pull out of it. So definitely read it if you've never read it. Or I feel like a reread would also be a great thing to do, but definitely do not discount it. Just because it's first doesn't mean it's the least. In terms of the order of importance of the books, I think it's probably one of the most important.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's like any great story. You got to have the things that introduce you, that explain certain things to you, that open you up to the world and what's going on in general. Which, of course, even the Eye of the World doesn't do 100%. There's a lot that you still have to learn as things go on, but it is definitely absolutely necessary to read if you're going to enjoy the entire series, whether it's audiobook format, the written format. When the series comes out, you're definitely going to appreciate having read The Eye of the World and getting a lot of the setup.
For sure.
Yeah, it's so good. And you'll only appreciate it more as you get further in the series, I think.
Yeah, and even sitting here talking about it tonight, because when we spoke and said, hey, we're going to kind of do you're going to kind of come in and kind of help with the Eye of the World book review, and my first thought was, I need to get back into the book and kind of see what I need to talk about. And then I'm going to be 100% honest, I didn't do that because I've been reading the other books because I'm still on my first read through. But sitting here talking about it tonight and the things that I remembered and the things you and Aaron have brought up about the book, just really kind of grew the importance and the quality of that book in my eyes, even sitting here talking about it. Not that I didn't appreciate it before, because I very much did. And to me, it's one of the more special books in the series, by far. But but yeah, it's definitely something that it's definitely a book that will leave an impression. And I really feel like it's definitely high quality fantasy for sure.
Oh yeah, like even talking about it, I haven't even finished my first reread, and I want to go back and read The Eye of the World again just to see what else I missed and haven't made connections.
Well, and it's because Robert Jordan was such a genius. I mean, you even said it yourself. You're sitting there reading, and it's like, Jordan, you son of a gun, you're slick, man, because he just sticks these little things in there all over the place. And like I said, in sitting here talking about Eye of the World tonight, it's like, oh yeah, they did say that, or they did go there, or they did do this, and then you're like, oh, but 5 books later, or next book, or 13 books later, or whatever, and it just all builds on top of it. And that's just good writing. That's just excellent writing to me. And that's actually probably one last thing I would say about Eye of the World that I don't think we've directly stated, is that it not only introduces you to the world and everything and the characters and all the other stuff, but it introduces you to Robert Jordan's writing style, which to me is such a very solid and it's just a great writing style. I really love the way Robert Jordan wrote.
Yeah, I did as well. But we are essentially out of time for this recording episode. Greg, if you want to take this time and kind of talk about kind of who you are on Twitter and what you're doing on Twitter, because we all enjoy it for sure. Those of us that already know, but definitely want to make sure that that's out there for you.
Well, I'll make it brief. I know we're about out of time, but it's. I do have a regular Twitter account, but seeing the explosion of character accounts for the Wheel of Time, I am one of the, I believe, 5 accounts that are on Twitter that are Randolph Thor, but I am specifically the Dragon Reborn. That is the name of my account. I have been trying really hard to hit 200 followers. I was at about 190 before we got on the podcast, and I've seen some notifications light up. So hopefully my my character tweeting has been effective today. But yeah, if you're looking to follow an active Wheel of Time account, and you're not already following the Luz Theron accounts and the other Randolph Thor accounts, it is the Dragon Reborn. The handle is the Dragon Reborn, but the last letter in the word Reborn is the letter 2. So it's like the Dragon Reborn 2. That's kind of weird to say, but I'm all over Twitter. I'm very active. I'm very active with the other character accounts, and if you follow me and tweet at me and say, hey, I'm doing this because I heard you on Black Tower, then I'll definitely give you a shout out, and in character, of course, not as me, but as Randolph Thor. And I did get a compliment the other day where someone told me, another character account told me that I was a pretty character accurate Randolph Thor, so that was probably one of the better compliments I've gotten recently. So it's just a lot of fun. I do it for fun, and I just hope everyone's entertained with it, and because I really enjoy it.
Yep, and for those of you who don't know, tarvalin.net, their Twitter account, they've got a list, one of the Twitter lists that they're ever expanding on character accounts. There's several other Twitter users that are involved with the thing that's become affectionately known as the Twitter of Time hashtag, that have lists not only of characters that are currently used and represented and who's representing them as far as Twitter handles, but also characters that are available. There's over 2,600 named characters. So if you're somebody that's like, man, I really love the series, I want to do a character account, but there's so many that's going to be taken. Obviously, go and the lists are out there. You can find them. I promise you, they're on Twitter. And if you can't find them, tweet any of the accounts, and it'll work as I heard it through the grapevine, and someone will get it to you and find it for you. I wish I could give you a link right now for it, but I can't. But I do know that tarvalin.net has compiled one of the Twitter lists that I believe they will continue to work on. So definitely look there. And you do a great job as Randolph Thor. I always enjoy it. I don't get to get on Twitter. I don't get to get on Twitter as much as I'd like to. Again, like Aaron does most of our Twittering. I'd say probably about like 80 to 90% of it. So I know he has a deeper, better appreciation as far as like seeing it. But when I do get to see it, I do enjoy it. And all the accounts, really. I haven't seen one that I don't really like or care for yet. But but yeah. So for the Black Tower, going back to us, I guess. Feel free to reach out to us with comments or questions or just any kind of thoughts you have, not only on the podcast but on the series as well. If you have ideas or things you'd like for us to talk about, you can find us on Twitter at Tower Podcast. You can also email us at blacktowerpod@gmail.com. You can find us at our podcast hosting site at blacktower.podbean. I know it's Black Tower Pod. Hold on, I've got the link right here. Yeah, blacktowerpod.podbean.com. There we go. And if you go to our hosting site, there are links there to the Twitter, to our YouTube. The hosting site will automatically port our episodes over to Twitter, so you can listen to YouTube, so you can listen to them on YouTube. There's also a link to our Facebook, which of course is the Black Tower Podcast on Facebook as well. There's a link to our Discord, which Greg here is a wonderful, fantastic contributing member to, as all of our members
Oh, stop.
are. There's some cool people in there. The White Tower Podcast girls are in the Discord. They co-run the Discord with us. Every now and again, the lovely people from Tavir and Tees hop in. Though, of course, don't pester them. Don't try to use this as an avenue to get in direct contact, please. That's all in our rules and guidelines, kind of thing. But there's a lot of really good people. There's other podcasters from like Wheel of Time Spoilers, Legendarium, and some others that are hanging around. And there's some Twitch streamers, some YouTube content creators that are hanging out in there. And there's always a conversation to have. It's always enjoyable. Much like the series, it does. I believe the series is more young adult to adult oriented, and the Discord certainly follows that trend. So if you don't have, if you don't have thick skin, I guess as far as that kind of content goes, definitely be cognizant of that. It's not like rampant sexual stuff. Like there's a section specifically for like spoilers from the series, so nobody will talk about things that'll spoil the series for you in the main chat. If someone wants to make more of the not safe for work comments and jokes and that kind of stuff, there's a separate channel for that. So we do try to make it as user friendly and I guess sanitary for the eyes as reasonable. But you're dealing with right? But you're dealing with a ton of different people from all across all different walks of life. There's people from overseas, us obviously being in the United States. There's people from overseas that talk in the Discord and obviously interact with Twitter at time. So do be cognizant of that. Also on the blacktowerpod.podbean.com, there's a little about section that has a small blurb about I almost said Andrew and myself, Aaron and myself, and kind of like who we are and how we got into the series. There's contact information. If you want to make sure you're doing the right email, that's listed there. And then, of course, the links to the other formats. And the last link we have on there goes in conjunction with the supporters page that we have. We did launch a Patreon not too long ago. We're developing rewards and stuff for the patrons. There's already a couple things up there for the 3 tiers. There's the opportunity to record a voiceover. There's going to be a monthly movie night for the correct tier and above. Not the correct, but what tier we set it at and above. And there's other things that we're working on. There's also blooper reels or extra little sound bits from where we're recording. Greg, obviously you've heard a little bit of probably what, if one comes from this one, what it will be by virtue of being involved. But so there's that kind of stuff there. And of course, we're taking suggestions and ideas for what we can add to Patreon, because if you're going above and beyond to help support us to bring this content to you guys, obviously we want to do as much as we can to reward you for that. And of course, everything that comes into Patreon goes into paying for the hosting platform at the podbean.com, any other kind of like expenditures like that we have, and potential equipment upgrades to bring you better quality content as much as we are able. So yeah, Facebook, Twitter, Discord, direct email, all that kind of stuff are ways you can reach us. And we love hearing from fans and really whoever wants to send us a message. Never be shy. Never be shy. You can even direct message us on Twitter. You don't have to just tweet at us. You can direct message us. And, it might take us a little bit to get back to you, but we will as soon as we can. Yeah, I think that's it. Normally I'd ask Aaron if I missed anything. I don't know, Greg, did I miss anything?
No, I don't think you did. But a quick shameless plug for me, something I completely forgot. For those of you who are on Facebook, I actually founded and started a nerdy discussion group called Talking Nerdy. That is exactly how it sounds. No G on the end of the word talking, just talking nerdy. We're currently at around 1,000 members, but always looking for more active members. I do stress the word active because we really like discussion. So if you find yourself needing some good discussion on Facebook, you can go find us there. It's not limited to any one nerdy topic, just nerdy stuff. So if it's Wheel of Time, which is probably why you're listening to this, or if you're into anything else, we talk about all kind of stuff. We'd love to have you, and love to have you come be active and be a part.
Yep. So there's plenty of avenues to get into the community, to join the community, to talk with the community. We encourage everyone to join in as many facets as you want and are able. And it's a very friendly, very accepting community. I haven't seen any real issues from anybody in the community at all. So don't be afraid. Don't think that you're going to come in and people are going to judge you or that kind of stuff. It's a very, very nice, very open community.
If they accepted me,
very
you're fine.
supportive.
If they accepted me, you're fine.
But we're going to go ahead and end this podcast here. So Greg, thank you very much for making yourself available and coming and hopping on the computer and chatting with us for this podcast as we talk about concepts and things from the eye of the world.
Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed the opportunity.
Yeah, we enjoyed it as well. So for those of us at the Black Tower, I am Andrew. And I am Aaron. It wasn't really Aaron, but I figured I had to say his name too. He just couldn't, finish with us because of adulting. But Aaron is here in spirit and the beginning part of the podcast. But thank you guys for listening, and we will see you all next time.